Arman Malik never chose this life, it chose him. Born in the slums where survival meant bending the rules, he learned early that power belonged to those who dared to take it. His father, a humble shopkeeper, spent his days fighting off loan sharks and corrupt officials until one evening, he was found beaten to death in a dark alley. The police called it a robbery, but Arman knew better. The system had failed his father, and at that moment, he vowed never to be powerless again. At 15, he started running errands for local gangsters, observing their ways, their codes, and their weaknesses. While others fought for scraps, Arman played the long game. He gained their trust, carried their messages, and delivered their threats. By 17, he was handling money, learning which hands to grease and which throats to cut. He had no love for violence, but he understood its necessity. Fear was currency, and he intended to be rich. The streets whispered his name long before he made his first real move. It came in the form of a betrayal, one he orchestrated with precision. Khan Saab, the reigning Don, saw potential in Arman and took him under his wing, offering him a seat at the table. But Arman was never meant to be a follower. He watched, learned, and waited. Khan Saab's biggest weakness was trust, and Arman exploited it mercilessly. A single phone call changed everything. A false tip led Khan Saab's men into an ambush, and in one brutal night, the city's underworld had a new king. Arman stepped over the bodies of his former allies and into a life he had built with blood and deception. The message was clear: loyalty was a myth, and survival belonged to those who struck first. The police tried to intervene, but their hands were already tied by the same money that funded their silence. Politicians extended their hands, eager to shake the palm that controlled the streets. Arman played the game well, ensuring that every move benefited him alone. He was no mere gangster. He was an architect of power, constructing an empire that ran deeper than any law. Yet, shadows always followed men like him. One evening, as he sat in his high-rise, overlooking the very city he had conquered, an envelope arrived. Inside were photographs, his secret meetings, his hidden operations, his sins captured on paper. At the bottom, a single line sent a chill through him. "Your story isn't yours to tell anymore." He crushed the paper in his fist, but he knew the truth. Someone was watching. Someone wanted him gone. And if there was one thing Arman Malik never tolerated, it was a threat left unanswered. Arman Malik's name had become legend. The streets whispered it with awe, fear, and reverence. Every deal, every crime, every bribe passed through his hands. He was no longer just a man, he was an institution. Police officers nodded in silent acknowledgement when his cars drove by, and politicians made backroom deals to stay in his good graces. Power was intoxicating, and he wielded it without hesitation. Money poured in from every corner: extortion, smuggling, illegal gambling. The city bent to his will. But power came with a cost, and Arman knew that staying on top was harder than getting there. He trusted no one completely, not even those closest to him. His inner circle was carefully selected, men who owed him their lives, men who feared him more than they feared death. Yet, cracks were beginning to show. Raghav, his most trusted lieutenant, had grown too confident, too ambitious. Arman noticed the subtle changes, the hesitation in his voice, the secretive meetings, the way his eyes lingered too long on opportunities that weren't his to take. Arman had seen betrayal before, and he knew how it started. But he wasn't ready to act. Not yet. Then came the journalist. A nobody, yet persistent enough to be dangerous. His articles hinted at things no one should have known: shipment routes, names of corrupt officials, secret hideouts. Someone was feeding him information. Arman ordered his men to find the leak, but every lead led to a dead end. Whoever was behind this was careful, methodical. It was no ordinary enemy. Amidst the growing tension, Arman found solace in the only person who reminded him of who he once was: his younger sister, Sanaa. Unlike him, she had no part in his world. He had kept her shielded, ensuring she never saw the blood that stained his hands. She believed he was a businessman, powerful but legitimate. He let her believe it because, in her eyes, he was still just her brother. But the illusion wouldn't last. The night everything changed, Arman was at one of his clubs, handling business as usual, when a courier arrived. A plain envelope, unmarked, placed in his hands without a word. Inside, a single photograph, his sister, leaving her university, unaware that she was being watched. And beneath it, the same words as before. "You're next." For the first time in years, Arman felt something foreign: fear. Not for himself, but for the one person he couldn't afford to lose. The city was turning against him, shadows moving where he couldn't see. He had built an empire, but now, someone was tearing it down. And whoever they weren't just after his throne. They wanted to see him fall. Completely. The walls were closing in. Arman had spent years ensuring every move was calculated, every loose end tied, but now, someone else was playing the game, and they were always a step ahead. The police raided his operations one by one, cutting through his empire like a disease. Warehouses were seized, shipments intercepted, accounts frozen. Informants who had once sworn loyalty to him were found dead, their silence ensured before they could speak. The journalist had finally done it. His latest exposé didn't just hint at Arman's empire, it tore it wide open. Names, locations, dates, everything laid bare. The once untouchable Don was now the city's most wanted man. Overnight, alliances shifted. The politicians who once sought his favor now denied ever knowing him. The officers he paid off suddenly found their moral compass. The fear that once protected him had turned to opportunity. Everyone wanted a piece of his downfall. But betrayal always cut the deepest when it came from within. Raghav, his right-hand man, had been working against him all along. He had been feeding the journalist information, orchestrating the raids, and waiting for the right moment to strike. Arman had suspected it, but he had underestimated the depth of the betrayal. Now it was undeniable. Arman moved quickly. He set a trap, sending word that he wanted to negotiate. Raghav took the bait, showing up to what he thought was a private meeting. But Arman's men were already in place, weapons drawn. It should have been simple: one bullet, one problem solved. But Raghav wasn't alone. The moment Arman gave the signal, gunfire erupted from all sides. Half of Arman's men turned on him. It wasn't just Raghav. The betrayal ran deeper than he had imagined. He barely escaped, fleeing through the back alleys that had once been his domain. But this time, he wasn't the hunter. He was the prey. Injured and alone, Arman had nowhere left to go. He had spent his life building a kingdom, yet at his lowest moment, there was no one left to stand beside him. The realization was bitter, but there was no time for regret. Then came a call. A blocked number. A voice distorted through static. "If you want to see your sister alive, come alone." Sana. The one person who was never supposed to be part of this world. Arman had fought, killed, and bled to protect her, and now she was being used against him. He knew the rules. No deals. No second chances. But this wasn't about power anymore. It wasn't about empire or revenge. It was about family. And Arman Malik would burn the whole city down before he let anyone take that from him. Arman arrived alone, just as they demanded. The warehouse was abandoned, its rusted doors barely holding against the wind. Inside, dim lights flickered over stacks of crates, casting long shadows. He could hear his heartbeat, steady but heavy. He wasn't afraid, not of death, not of pain. He had accepted long ago that men like him didn't get happy endings. But Sana did. She had to. Raghav stood at the center, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk on his face. He had won, and he wanted Arman to know it. Behind him, Sana sat tied to a chair, eyes wide with fear. Arman met her gaze, giving her the only reassurance he could, a silent promise. "You built an empire," Raghav said. "And you really thought you'd keep it forever?" Arman didn't respond. Words were useless now. He had come for his sister, nothing else. Raghav motioned to his men, and one of them shoved Sana forward, forcing a knife against her throat. Arman's fingers twitched, but he stayed still. One wrong move, and she was gone. "This city has a new ruler," Raghav continued. "Your time is over. You walk away now, you live. But you leave everything behind. Arman laughed, low and bitter. You still don't get it? Raghav frowned. This was never about power, Arman said. It was about survival. And in that moment he moved. The gun was already in his hand before anyone could react. A single shot rang out, and the man holding Sanaa dropped, blood spilling across the concrete. Chaos erupted. Bullets tore through the air. Sanaa screamed, dropping to the ground as Arman pulled her away, using the crates for cover. Raghav fired wildly, his confidence turning to panic. Arman's men had always feared him, but they had never seen him fight like this, with nothing left to lose. One by one, the traitors fell. The warehouse reeked of gunpowder and blood. Then, silence. Arman stepped forward, gun leveled at Raghav, who was gasping, bleeding, backing away like a wounded animal. You were right, Arman said. No one stays on top forever. He pulled the trigger. Raghav crumpled, his reign ending before it could begin. Arman turned to Sanaa, untying her hands. We're leaving, he said. She looked at him, eyes filled with something he had never seen before, fear, not for him, but of him. Who are you? She whispered. The words cut deeper than any bullet. For the first time, Arman had no answer. He led her out into the night, sirens wailing in the distance. His empire was gone. His enemies were dead. But as he disappeared into the darkness, one truth remained. The dawn had fallen, but the city would never forget his name.